When the appointed months had passed, joy came at last to Ayodhya. Queen Kausalya bore Rama, Kaikeyi bore Bharat, and gentle Sumitra, who had drunk the sacred payasam twice, gave birth to twin boys, Lakshmana and Satrughna. Four radiant suns now brightened Dasaratha's halls, and the long grief of the childless king dissolved forever in a father's happy tears. By the measure of payasam each mother drank, the sages said. So great was the portion of Vishnu each boy carried, and Rama bore the fullest share. Yet the wise only smiled at such reckoning, for the divine can never be weighed or divided. Even the smallest spark of the infinite is itself entire, whole born of whole, and whole forever remaining. The princes grew like young lions in the palace of Ayodhya, schooled in the Vedas, in horsemanship, and in the handling of every weapon. From their earliest days to friendships shone brightest of all. Lakshman clung to Rama as a shadow to its lord, while Satrughna followed Bharat everywhere. So the four brothers grew, matched heart to heart in loving pairs. King Dasaratha watched his sons ripen into strong, brave, and gentle young men, skilled in arms yet tender of heart, beloved by all of Ayodhya. Every fear that had once shadowed his throne was gone. Looking upon the four princes, the aged king felt his life complete, and his thoughts turned softly toward the joy of one day seeing them wed. One day, as Dasaratha sat in his council pondering fitting brides for his sons, a stir broke the calm of the court. Breathless ushers hurried in and bowed low, their voices bright with awe. The great sage Viswamitra himself had come to Ayodhya, they announced, and stood even now at the palace gates, asking to see the king. No name commanded greater awe than Viswamitra's, mightiest of all the rishis, and his coming unannounced could only mean some great purpose. At once, Dasaratha rose from his golden throne and stepped down to meet him, walking forward with folded hands. Crowned emperor though he was, the king bowed like a humble pupil before the fierce and radiant sage. Now this Viswamitra had not always been a sage. Once he had been a great king, who by fearsome penance had climbed toward sainthood itself. So vast had his powers grown that he once began to forge a second creation, a rival heaven with new stars of his own, until the terrified gods implored him to stop before he unmade the order of the worlds. Long before, while still a king, Viswamitra had ridden through the forest with his vast army and chanced upon the hermitage of the sage Vasishtha. The gentle rishi welcomed his royal guest with open arms and set before the whole marching host a feast so lavish and unending that the astonished king could not begin to imagine its source. When Viswamitra asked how a forest hermitage could pour out such riches, Vasishtha only smiled and called softly by name. From among the trees came Sabala, his radiant cow, and the sage explained that she was no ordinary creature, but a fountain of unfailing plenty, granting at his wish whatever any heart or hunger could desire. The wonder in the king's eyes hardened swiftly into greed. Bowing his thanks, Viswamitra declared that so priceless a treasure was wasted in a hermitage and belonged by right to a king. He asked Vasishtha to hand Sabala over to him, certain that a mere forest sage could never refuse the will of a mighty emperor. But Vasishtha would not give her up. Gently he explained that Sabala was dearer to him than any wealth and could never be parted from his hermitage, and he begged the king to let the matter rest. Yet every soft refusal only fanned Viswamitra's craving hotter, until the one cow he could not have became the one thing he most desired. At last, the king's patience snapped. If the sage would not give the cow freely, then he would simply take her. Viswamitra barked a command, and his rough soldiers surged forward, seizing the gentle Sabala with ropes and goads to drag her away from the only home and the only master she had ever known. But Sabala would not go, weeping great tears. Bewildered that her beloved master let her be taken, she tore free of the soldiers and ran to Vasishtha's feet. Moved to the very heart, the sage bade her defend herself. In that instant, a fierce warrior host sprang blazing from her body, and the king's startled men were scattered like leaves before a storm. Maddened, Viswamitra leapt into his chariot, seized his bow, and loosed a storm of arrows upon the cowborn warriors. But their strength had no end, and his royal army crumbled before them. When his own sons rushed forward to strike down Vasishtha, the sage's power flared, and in a single breath, they were burned to ashes where they stood, defeated and shamed before his own men. Viswamitra saw that no weapon of a king could ever match the power of a sage. Bitterly, he handed his throne to one of his sons and turned his back on his kingdom forever. Away he went to the lonely Himalayas, resolved to win by fierce penance to Lord Shiva the might to crush Vasishtha. For long years, Viswamitra stood locked in burning austerity, his devotion fixed wholly on Lord Shiva. So unshakable was his penance that the great god was pleased and appeared before him at last, shining upon the mountainside, and asked the fierce ascetic what boon his heart was so fiercely set upon. Viswamitra bowed and made his fierce request. If the Lord was truly pleased with him, let him be granted mastery of every celestial weapon and divine arrow that existed in all the worlds. He would be content with nothing less than to command the whole armory of heaven, so that no rival might ever stand against him again. So be it, said the Lord, and granted his wish in full. Into Viswamitra's keeping passed every weapon known to the gods and Gandharvas, to rishis, yakshas, and demons alike, a blazing arsenal of divine power. The ascetic's heart swelled, for now he held, he believed, might enough to humble any foe on earth or in heaven. Swollen with pride like an ocean at flood, Viswamitra marched straight for Vasishtha's hermitage, certain the sage was already as good as beaten. At his fearful approach, the disciples and the very animals of the ashram fled in every direction. Then he loosed his fire weapon, and the peaceful hermitage was swallowed in flame and left in smoking cinders. Grieved to see his gentle refuge in ashes, yet calm as ever, Vasishtha resolved that the proud king's arrogance must at last be broken. He took up his Brahmadanda, the plain holy staff of a sage, and walked out to face the raging Viswamitra alone, armed with nothing at all but the quite unshakable strength of his spirit. Screaming with rage, Viswamitra hurled against him every divine weapon Shiva had given, one after another, in a torrent of fire and thunder. But as each blazing astra flew near the sage's staff, it was quenched and drunk down as a flame is swallowed by the sea. Weapon after weapon vanished, and still Vasishtha stood untouched. One weapon alone remained, the dreaded Brahmastra, mightiest of them all. Viswamitra launched it, and the whole world dimmed as though an eclipse had swallowed the sun. Even the immortals trembled in their heavens. Yet the terrible weapon too sunk harmlessly into the holy staff and sage together blazed with all the glory they had absorbed. Viswamitra stood dazed and empty-handed. Aloud he confessed his defeat. What was the boasted might of a warrior when a single staff had swallowed every weapon he owned? Shiva, he thought bitterly, had made a fool of him. There was only one path left worth walking now: to become, through penance, a Brahma Rishi as great as Vasishtha himself. So Viswamitra turned away from the battlefield of weapons forever. He would win by the spirit what he could never seize by force. Southward he journeyed, deep into solitude, and there gave himself to austerities harsher than any he had yet endured. Hungering now, not for a cow or a kingdom, but for the highest rank among the sages. Years of unbroken penance passed, and at last, Lord Brahma, the Creator himself, appeared, pleased with his perseverance. But the boon he gave fell short of the ascetic's longing. Brahma named him a Raja Rishi, a royal sage, greatest among the kings who had become seers. And with that single word, the Creator vanished again from his sight. But Viswamitra was still not content. To be a royal sage was to stand below Vasishtha yet, and nothing less than the title of Brahma Rishi, the equal of his old rival, could ever satisfy his proud and burning heart. So, refusing every lesser honor, he set his jaw and plunged once more into penance fiercer than before.